Well, folks, we've done it. We've made it to the end of Natlan's Archon quest finale, and I gotta say, there is no way this story is over yet. Yeah, I know I said we just finished the finale, but Mafuika still has the Gnosis, and the captain of the Harbingers is kind of dead. So I feel like the Tsaritsa is gonna have to respond somehow, because we're heading to Stizhnaya next, and it would be really weird if we had to go back to get the final Gnosis. You know what I mean? But in spite of the fact that I think this finale is not the real finale, I did think that now is as good a time as ever to recap the entire Archon quest. Yep, all 5 acts, plus the interlude wrapped into one condensed, packaged, and fortified with additional contextual information found elsewhere like story quests and world quests and item descriptions and, that kind of thing. So buckle up, little lore spores. This one is quite lengthy, and that's why there will be timestamps, spoiler warnings, citations, attributions, and links to related content in the description box, and you can also find post-video notes and corrections in the pinned comment. Make good use of those, because I'm gonna blow my voice out recording this one, so maybe we don't waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. Previously on Genshin Impact. The Traveler's actions in Fontaine successfully prevented its citizens from melting down into primordial people juice. They did have to sacrifice a god to get there, but such is life. They also made some Harbinger friends, restored the Hydro Dragon to his full power, and fought off a giant space narwhal. So all in all, a pretty successful trip. But the Gnosis did find its way into the Fatui's hands, so I guess we'll just leave Fontaine in Nouvelette's capable hands and make our way to Natlan. Now at this point in the story, the only thing we really know about Natlan is that they have fighting tournaments, hot springs, and that they live together with a dragon species called Saurians. And part of the reason why this is all we know about the people of Natlan is that they rarely leave Natlan. So the only people who really know anything about the Nation of Fire are those who have traveled there themselves. So this time we're kind of going in blind. So after crossing the desert and entering Natlan's borders officially, our first encounter is actually with these glowing stone pillars which warp us to a mini domain where a tiny Tapetlosaur has been imprisoned. Now this is Little Guy, and he ends up being our Saurian companion throughout our adventures in Natlan, and he also plays a very big role in most of the world quests. But he doesn't really show up much in the Archon quest, so I'm going to leave his story for another time. But he does deserve a mention. Fortunately, Little Guy's domain is quite close to the very first settlement of Natlan, the cliffside dwellings of the Children of Echoes, and that's where we meet Kachina, who's having a very, very bad day. Kachina explains that Natlan regularly hosts a nationwide competition called the Pilgrimage of the Return of the Sacred Flame. It's a huge honor to participate, even more so if you rank highly, and if you manage to win the competition, you earn the right to participate in the Night Warden Wars. And while that sounds pretty cool, Kachina's teammates kinda ditched her, which is gonna make progressing through the pilgrimage a little tricky. Now, we don't really learn the details about this Pilgrimage of the Return of the Sacred Flame until a bit later, but since it is the focal point of the entire nation, I do think it's important that we take the time now to go over the basics of Natlan's troubles and the purpose of the pilgrimage and all that kind of stuff. That'll save us from having to go over these little details later and interrupt the plot. This is a fairly long and dry explanation of all of the world building here, so stick with me. The Abyss is basically the enemy of all of Teyvat, as it copies, corrodes, and corrupts everything that it touches. The best line of defense against the Abyss is elemental energy and memories, both of which flow through Teyvat's leyline system, making the ley lines Teyvat's primary abyssal defense system. If it were to ever get compromised, Teyvat would be kinda cooked. Natlan is a perfect example of this, as the nation had fragile ley lines to begin with, which meant that when the Abyss invaded Teyvat several thousand years ago, Natlan's defenses were very weak, and the nation was almost completely destroyed. But the nation was saved when Asili, known as the Lord of the Night, used her own life force to take the fragments of the ley lines and reconstruct them into a new entity known as the Night Kingdom. This brought back some level of stability to the nation. Just to make this process easier to conceptualize, think of normal ley lines as pipes carrying water in the form of elemental energy and memories. In Natlan, these pipes would have been shattered, thus releasing the liquid inside and disrupting the flow within the pipeline. The Lord of the Night basically took all of these shattered fragments of these pipes and built a water basin out of them using her own life as the glue that would hold the fragments together. So if anything happened to her, then all of the fragments would just fall apart and the water would go everywhere and the whole nation would just collapse. Later on, the first Pyro Archon, Xbalanque, further strengthened this arrangement by making a deal with Renova, the Shade of Death. I assume most of you know about shades by now since you're watching a lore channel and all, but for those of you who don't know or just forgot, here's the deal. The individual nations of Teyvat are actually ruled directly by the 7 Archons, but the Archons themselves take orders from the 5 primary entities in Celestia. Those entities include the lead god, who's known as the Heavenly Principles, the Primordial One, or the First Descender, you can take your pick, and they have 4 subordinate gods who are known as Shades that govern over the principles of life, death, time, and space. The only shade we're really concerned about for the purposes of Natlan's Archon quest is Renova. She governs over the concept of death and can therefore decide if and when death occurs. This also means that she can deny life forms the right to die, thereby making them immortal. She can also nullify death, meaning if someone dies, she can go, nope, no death for you, and effectively revive them. And it's this revival power that the first Pyro Archon Xbalanque wanted, so he made an agreement with Renova declaring that if she lent him the power of revival, even in a limited form, then he would guarantee that the people of Natlan would be victorious in their battle against the Abyss. And she agreed to this deal on the condition that he claimed that he stole her power so that she wouldn't get in trouble with her boss. Xbalanque agreed to her terms, and then he used this power to establish new rules for Natlan, all centered around the concept of ancient names. Ancient names are kind of like an inherited title or role that can be passed on from generation to generation in Natlan, sort of like a family heirloom. But instead of inheriting the name from your family, the name is given to you by the tribe's guardian spirit known as a Wayab. Ancient name bearers naturally embody the values represented by their names. For example, Kachina's name, Uthabidi, means resilience, and she is very, very resilient, as we shall see throughout the Archon quest. But there's more to ancient names than just being simplistic character traits. They also serve as historical records, faithfully documenting the heroic deeds of each of their name bearers. And if the name bearer can fully embody the virtue of their ancient name, they can draw power from those recorded memories. Now, some ancient names come with a very specific responsibility. For example, Kiongozi, which means leader, is the ancient name that's given to the one who becomes the nation's Archon, which means that in Natlan, the position of Archon is an inherited one. Any human can become the Archon if they manage to obtain the name Kiongozi. This was another one of the rules that Xbalanque established for Natlan. This also means that every Archon that inherits the name of Kiongozi is also inheriting that book, that historical legacy of every previous Archon that's ever come before them. Now remember, the reason why Xbalanque went around establishing these rules was for the sole purpose of winning his bet against Renova and protecting Natlan from the Abyss. And that's where the pilgrimage for the return of the Sacred Flame comes into play, which is what got us on this whole tangent in the first place. As the Pyro Archon, Xbalanque and his successors have access to the throne of the Pyro Dragon Xuecoatl, and thus they also possess some of their powers, one of which manifests as the Sacred Flame that never goes out. The flame is comprised of both the Sovereign's power and phlogiston, and as we'll learn later on, phlogiston is the foundation or like the precursor to elemental energy, and as we've already established, elemental energy actively counters the Abyss. So as long as the Sacred Flame keeps burning, it can completely protect the surface of Natlan from being invaded by abyssal forces. Now, I know I said that the flame never really goes out, but a flame can't burn forever without fuel. That's just the way it is. So Xbalanque also created the pilgrimage for the return of the Sacred Flame as a means to keep the Sacred Flame burning indefinitely. Contestants would generate manifestations of the Memory of Combat, also known as Contending Fire, which would be used to feed the flames and keep them burning. So whether you win or lose, if you participate, you are playing an active role in keeping Natlan safe, and I think that's actually kind of cool. In addition to feeding the Sacred Flame, the pilgrimage has another purpose. While the surface of Natlan may be under the protection of the Sacred Flame, the Abyss still lingers within the Night Kingdom and must be regularly suppressed to both prevent damage to the Night Kingdom and to prevent the Abyss from overpowering the Sacred Flame and swallowing Natlan whole. For this reason, winners of the pilgrimage are sent to fight in an additional event called the Night Warden Wars, which is basically an Abyss suppression mission. And since the Abyss's behavior can be a bit unpredictable, the pilgrimage is held whenever the Abyss starts acting up. So that can be once a year, or multiple times a year, or even multiple times a month. These missions are extremely dangerous and result in countless casualties that under normal circumstances would have decimated Natlan's population by now. To prevent this from happening, Xbalanque also obtained the Ode of Resurrection from Renova. This is a song capable of bringing the dead back to life under certain conditions, which would help bolster Natlan's forces and keep them fighting the Abyss for longer. The first condition that has to be met is that at least one member of the team sent to fight in the Night Warden Wars must return alive alive in order for the rest to be resurrected. If the entire team dies, then the Ode of Resurrection will not bring any of them back. The Ode of Resurrection also only works on those who possess an ancient name. See, another one of the key features of ancient names is that they are able to serve as unique identifiers, beacons, or even anchors that allow the spirits of the fallen to be easily found and retrieved from the Night Kingdom. Without an ancient name to keep them anchored, the soul of the deceased would be quickly swept away and lost in the Sea of Souls. This makes ancient name bearers an extremely powerful and important asset in the fight against the Abyss. And for that reason, all ancient name bearers are required to participate in the pilgrimage. But there's a catch. If the entire Night Warden team dies, the ancient names that they possessed are also destroyed and can never be inherited again. Natlan does have people like Shilonen who are able to forge new ancient names, but it's still a huge loss to lose them, since ancient names get more powerful over time as they accumulate more and more memories. And that more or less concludes our basic introduction to Natlan. So let's get back to Kachina, who needs to report to the stadium in preparation for the pilgrimage. Because, she's required to be there even though her teammates abandoned her because she is an ancient name bearer. Luckily for us, the stadium is also where the Pyro Archon is, and maybe you've forgotten this at this point because it has been years, but the whole reason the Traveler is wandering around Teyvat is so that they can talk to every Archon and see if they know something about the unknown god that took their sibling. Yes, that is still a thing. Anyway, as we're leaving, we pass by the Pyro Archon statue of 7, which means it's time to resonate with the statue and get some new elemental abilities. Only this time, we're unable to resonate with the statue, and we're not exactly sure why. So no new Pyro abilities for now, although we can automatically wield Phlogiston, which is apparently the source of all elemental power and something only dragons and people from Natlan can use, so more on that later. At the stadium, we get to meet Kachina's friends, Mualani, who belongs to the people of the Springs tribe, and Kanich, who belongs to the Scions of the Canopy tribe. Both of them are ancient name bearers and also participants in the pilgrimage. Now, since Kachina's teammates ditched her earlier, Mualani decides to team up with Kachina and has her own teammates join Kanich's team instead. Kachina has never won a pilgrimage before, so her confidence right now is at an all-time low. A pep talk and a little practice is all she needs to breeze through some team challenges, and she even manages to win the individual challenges, landing her a place among 4 other Night Warden warriors for the very first time. A side note, does anyone else feel kind of bad about sending a child off to war against the nightmare creatures of the Abyss even though they have ancient names? No? Just me? Well, until this Night Warden war is over, there's not really much to do, so Mualani invites us to the people of the Spring Settlement for some relaxation under the hospitality of Atea, a friend of the current Pyro Archon, former warrior, and current overseer of the Hot Springs. Atea can no longer bathe in the Hot Springs or participate in the pilgrimage due to an abyssal infection that she sustained during a Night Warden war, which definitely isn't foreshadowing for anything. Still, we have fun at the Springs and have a nice long sleep, or at least we would, except that later that night, the Traveler wakes up to the sound of combat. Apparently, the Night Warden War isn't going so well, and an abyssal pylon has appeared within the territory of the Springs people, spawning countless monsters and mimics of the Abyss. Now, this does seem to be a fairly frequent event nowadays, but it's still not good. We managed to take out the first pylon and prevent any more monsters from spawning in the immediate vicinity, but there is, of course, another pylon on the other side of the settlement. And in a twist no one saw coming, Atea apparently took on that pylon herself, and while she did destroy it, it also came at a great cost to her. The abyssal power within the pylon aggravated her abyssal infection, and it's only a matter of time before it consumes her entire body. But something about this incident reminds the Traveler of the Anemo dragon, Dvalin, way back in Mondstadt. Dvalin had been infected by abyssal blood so badly that even his tears had traces of abyssal power in them. But the Traveler had somehow managed to purge the abyss from those tears and later from Dvalin himself. Although, perhaps purge isn't the right word to use here. While it's true that elemental energy can repel the abyss, the Traveler isn't actually applying elemental energy when they treat Atea's condition. If you look carefully, you'll notice that the flow of the abyss is moving towards the Traveler. Like, they're absorbing it or sucking it out. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're not cleansing the abyssal power, they're absorbing it. And we know this because the description for the Xbox Wind Glider says that the Traveler's sibling actually possesses the ability to absorb infinite amounts of abyssal energy. And since they're twins, it is very likely that the Traveler has this exact same ability. So rather than using elemental energy to force the abyss out of Atea's body, the Traveler is literally sucking the abyss out and taking it into their own body, with no negative consequences, which isn't suspicious at all. Obviously, I'm just kidding. It's very suspicious, and I wrote a whole theory about it if you want to hear my thoughts on it. And I highly recommend you do go check that out because this so-called purifying power's true nature is never addressed or explored in the Archon quest at all. Anyway, this extraction of abyssal energy does seem to do the trick for now. But while the bulk of this poison may be gone from Atea's system, that poison has been eating away at her from the inside for years. So the Traveler may have managed to buy her some time, but her condition is still terminal. Atea even admits as much and tells us to give her pendant to the Pyro Archon. Now, recent events have had Paimon a bit confused. She questions how the Abyss can be considered cunning, which is how Mualani describes it, when it seems like the Abyss is just mindlessly trying to destroy whatever it can. Mualani explains that as far as the people of Natlan know, the Abyss isn't actually a living entity and thus doesn't possess any capacity for logic or reason, but it still somehow manages to exploit specific weaknesses of the people of Teyvat. For example, during the Cataclysm 500 years ago when the Abyss invaded Natlan, each tribe witnessed an abyssal disaster that was perfectly designed to counter their unique environments. The people of the Springs had their water contaminated by the Abyss, and the children of the Echoes had toxic mud spewing out from underground, and the Flower Feather clan faced horrific black wind storms. So Mualani reasons that this type of behavior implies that the Abyss has some kind of intelligence, which is a fair assumption, but the truth is a bit more nuanced than that. I mean, it always is. And that means we need to learn a little bit more world building, so here goes. Teyvat is the physical realm, which doesn't really need that much explaining. It's the place where you live and breathe and run around in, and it's governed by different laws like gravity, and overall it's pretty easy to understand. But the ley lines and the Night Kingdom are more of an immaterial realm. They contain all of the data that allows things to take physical shape within Teyvat. Whether you call this stuff data, memories, thoughts, dreams, stories, or concepts doesn't really matter. The point is more that we have a realm for intangible thoughts and a realm for physical things, and that the two have this inseparable relationship. Now, according to the drops and descriptions of the Abyssal Papilla, the Abyss wishes to get closer to the tree-like world of Teyvat, and to do that, it extracts concepts from the ley lines and uses those concepts as blueprints to create abyssal copies of things that exist within Teyvat. It's basically turning intangible thoughts into physical things made of abyssal material. So rather than saying the Abyss expertly crafted the perfect disaster to ruin each clan during the Cataclysm, the Abyss more likely just extracted whatever concepts of disaster that were local to each region and then replicated them out of abyssal material. This is enough to give the Abyss the feeling of being intelligent in some way, but without the ability to reason on its own. So, in a way, we could think of the Abyss as like some kind of mirror, which also means that Natlan's struggle to eliminate the Abyss partially comes from the inherent challenge of having to face yourself and win. This is actually pretty heavily steeped in Jungian philosophy, and anyone who's played any sort of Persona game knows exactly what I mean by that. It basically suggests that every person has their own dark shadow self, and that you have to overcome your shadow self in order to not let it completely consume you. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing and simplifying, but you get the idea. Let's not dwell too much on the philosophical side of things, because the Night Warden Wars are coming to an end. Unfortunately, Kachina fell in the battle against the Abyss, but that's not really a problem because her team was victorious overall, so she can be brought back to life with the Ode of Resurrection. That means it's time to head back to the stadium to celebrate the Night Warden Warriors' victory and also sing the Ode of Resurrection to bring Kachina back. Now, I touched on this a little bit earlier when I was talking about ancient names and how they act as sort of like anchor points or beacons within the Night Kingdom so that we can actually find the souls of the deceased so we can bring them back to life. But what I didn't mention is that the Sacred Flame itself seems to act like a gateway between Teyvat and the Night Kingdom. And the Ode of Resurrection seems to function like a key that unlocks this gateway and allows souls to pass back and forth. So when the song begins, the Pyro Archon enters the Sacred Flame and thus enters the Night Kingdom, where they will then retrieve the souls of the fallen Night Warden warriors and then bring them back to Teyvat. This interpretation is also corroborated by text in the Obsidian Codex, just for reference. Now, this ritual has never failed a single time in thousands of years, until now. Although the ode is sung and Mavuika enters the Sacred Flame, she cannot find Kachina's soul. The Ode of Resurrection has failed in its purpose, and without the ability to respawn their warriors, holding the pilgrimage of the return of the Sacred Flame is way too dangerous. As for why this is happening, Mavuika theorizes that the Abyss has found a way to weaken the Sacred Flame, which in turn messes with the Ode of Resurrection. She thinks the Abyss wants to shake people's faith in the pilgrimage and the Sacred Flame's ability to protect Natlan, because without that faith, the people won't unite to fight against the Abyss. Is that theory correct? I don't really know. But Mavuika wants to avoid this possibility at any cost. Remember, without the pilgrimage, there will be no contending fire generated to feed the Sacred Flame, which also makes it easier for the Abyss to invade Natlan because the Sacred Flame will grow weaker over time. And to make matters worse, the current level of contending fire production is already severely lacking. Abyssal corrosion has created a lack of pyro energy, which is needed to fuel the Sacred Flame. The appearance of the pylons over at the People of the Springs tribe is evidence that the power of the Sacred Flame is already growing weaker. So Natlan's in a pretty bad spot right now, needless to say. So our new goals are pretty clear. We need to go to the Night Kingdom, retrieve Kachina, and restore the functionality of the Ode of Resurrection. Then we can allow the pilgrimage to continue and generate more contending fire that will feed the Sacred Flame and keep Natlan safe. Easy, right? Not really. Like I said earlier, the Night Kingdom is basically Natlan's realm of the dead. If you stay down there too long, you'll lose your sense of self and become lost in the Sea of Souls. So it's a bit like pouring a cup of water into a lake. Your body or sense of self is the cup that separates the water of your soul from the rest of the water in the lake, but if you lose that cup and become separated from it, your watery soul merges with the water of the Lake of Souls. You can try to use a cup to scoop the watery soul back out, but it will never be the same water or soul that you had before. I think ancient names are also serving as the lid that goes on top of this cup in the scenario, and they help prevent the soul from being lost too quickly. What this basically means is that we have to save Kachina within a time limit. And of course, things get more complicated when Capitano, the first of the Fatui Harbingers, shows up and challenges Mavuika to a duel for the Gnosis. Well, technically what he wants to do is create new rules for Natlan the way Xbalanque did thousands of years ago. He seems to think that his rules could save Natlan, which is an interesting take for a Harbinger, but okay. Arlecchino genuinely wanted to save Fontaine, so I buy it. Mavuika barely manages to eke out a win against him, inflicting a minor injury in a very important spot that we'll talk about later on. But before she can question him further, he vanishes in a cloud of smoke created by Auroron, one of the masters of the Nightwind tribe. We'll come back to the two of them later. Our current priority is going to the Scions of the Canopy to retrieve the Spirit Seeker Stone. The stone itself was made by Citlali, a powerful shaman of the Masters of the Nightwind, who is particularly adept at all things relating to the Night Kingdom. We should be able to use this stone to locate Kachina's ancient name within the Night Kingdom, which is going to be very helpful. The process of using the Spirit Seeker Stone to find Kachina's ancient name within the Night Kingdom is described to us using a fishing metaphor. Kachina's ancient name is the fish we want to catch, and the Spirit Seeker Stone is the boat we need to reach the fish. So we're also going to need a fish net to catch said fish, and also a fisherman to do the fishing. Our fisherman is a man named Vichama, who only agrees to help if he can also search for the ancient name of his fallen friend Malco. After we agree to his terms, he instructs us to collect physical ropes so that we can weave it into a quote-unquote conceptual net. Now, interestingly, this means the Spirit Seeker Stone and the Abyssal Pylons work on the same principles. Earlier, we talked about how the Abyss can take intangible thoughts from the ley lines in the Night Kingdom and turn them into tangible things by extracting data from the ley lines and then creating things from those thoughts in the physical world. But this process works in reverse as well. If we make a tangible net in the physical world, there will also be a concept of an intangible net in the Night Kingdom, which means by making a real net, we can make a conceptual net that can literally fish for Kachina's ancient name in the Sea of Souls. And we find Kachina's name easily enough, but Vichama nearly dies trying to find Malko's name, and he only lives because the Traveler started sucking up all the abyssal energy that was leaking out of the Spirit Seeker Stone. Chaska breaks the stone before Malko can be found, leaving Vichama with only a small fragment of Malko's memory left. Now back at the stadium, Mahuika placed her Archon powers back in the Sacred Flame in order to buy us some more time. Now this proves to be a pretty inconsequential thing in the grand scheme of things, but I'm mentioning it anyway because at the time it seemed like a pretty big deal. And when we get back, she takes us to her treasure room where she keeps trinkets and gifts and basically anything that has some kind of sentimental value for her. These objects apparently house the memories of their owners in the form of contending fire. So in a pinch, Mahuika can also use these as firewood for the Sacred Flame. The pendant we got from Atea also falls into this category. Now that we have Kachina's ancient name, Mahuika can perform a ceremony to locate Kachina's soul, which allows her to communicate with us, if only for a moment. Kachina hasn't been hiding in a dark corner this whole time, though. She's actually been investigating what's going on in the Night Kingdom. She claims that the Wayab has actually been infected by the Abyss, and since the Wayab govern ancient names and help manage the flow of the souls within the Night Kingdom, this is what broke the functionality of the Ode of Resurrection. Think of it like putting a kink in a hose so the water can't flow out. And now that we know where Kachina's ancient name is, we can go to the Night Kingdom and fetch her. And along the way, we pass through ancient structures that were apparently built by dragons. Chaska explains that the world used to be ruled by dragons, which is something we already knew, and that these are the remains of their civilization. As much as I would love to go into more detail about all of this, it's actually kind of inconsequential for the content of the Archon quest, so I'll just link you to some videos where I talk about it more in depth and you can kind of watch those in your own time. But before we continue with our adventure into the Night Kingdom, I need to clear up one little thing. I know this entrance we use in the Archon quest to get to the Night Kingdom looks like a literal tear in the fabric of space-time, and it technically is. But the Night Kingdom is a real physical space, kind of? Or at least, it is contained within some sort of physical structure, even though I did say that it is technically the realm of the intangible. The intangible is still sort of encased in something. It's kind of like how your thoughts are within your brain, but they're also not. But anyway, the reason why we know this is connected to some sort of physical space is because in Natlan, you can fall through a very, 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 very deep hole and eventually land in the Night Kingdom. No portals required. And this may feel really weird and confusing, but remember, the Night Kingdom is just a variation of the ley lines, and the ley lines do have a physical form, or at least are contained within something that has a physical form, since they are, in fact, the roots of Irminsul. And we do see those roots in places. You can touch them, you can climb on them, they're there. I mean, here's an example of them in Inazuma. The reason I wanted to clarify this is because we are actually physically in the Night Kingdom. We're not astral projecting or anything like that. But that also means that Kachina down here is also physically within the Night Kingdom. It's not just her soul. Because if it was just her soul, we would see her look very different. Like when we see dead people down here, they take a very ghostly form. Kachina has her real body, which means when she died in the Night Warden War, her whole body went down into the Night Kingdom. Now, I'm sorry for the tangent, but when we fight things in this game and they die, they usually sort of disappear into some kind of stardust, some sort of abyss-looking stardust. Like the whole physical form just sort of evaporates, and most will write that off as a game mechanic, and I am happy to as well, but the fact that Kachina's whole body is in the realm of the dead, and this is what it looks like when things die in Teyvat, makes me wonder if dying in Teyvat makes your whole body disintegrate into some sort of dust and then recombine down in the ley lines or the Night Kingdom. And then you get sort of broken down over time until you become a ghost. If that's not how it works, then I have no explanation for why Kachina is still whole when we get down here. It is never explained in the Archon quest or anywhere else for that matter. Anyway, sorry, tangent, but I had to get that out of my system because it still feels important somehow. Maybe it'll come up later. But for now, we really need to find Kachina because again, we're on a time limit. And lucky for us, we actually have a tour guide down here. It's Vichama's friend, Malko. Malko leads us straight to Kachina, who really, really wants to save the Abyss-corrupted Wayab because that's what's breaking the Ode of Resurrection. Malco then explains that the Wayab basically have a whole network of obsidian pillars scattered around the Night Kingdom, and those help them to locate souls as part of the Ode of Resurrection's whole function. And if those pillars become corrupted, they cannot be used to locate souls. Again, think of it as like having a series of hoses and someone kinked one of the hoses, so now the water can't flow through. So we hunt down the infected pillar, beat up the Abyss Lector that was stalking Kachina, and that is apparently enough for Mualani to connect to her ancient name's true history and inherit all of the memories of its previous bearers. Which is also part of a big old plan that Mawika has cooked up that we're going to circle back to in a minute. We still need to purify this Wayab, and I want you to pay very close attention to what's happening here. Chaska, Iansan, Kachina, and Mualani are all pushing elemental energy towards the Wayab, which should push the Abyss out of the pillar, but the Traveler's energy is moving in the opposite direction. They're sucking the Abyss in. More evidence for Traveler, the Abyss Eater. But the Abyss did not like that at all, and a big ol' wave of abyssal energy tries to swallow everybody whole in a chase sequence that really feels like that one scene at the end of the Golden Slumber quest. And just when all hope of escape seems lost, Mawika opens up a brand new escape path with just her mind in the most confusing cinematic possible. As far as I can tell, Mawika basically burned all of the mementos in her treasure room so that she could forcibly open the gate between the Sacred Flame and the Night Kingdom in order to get everybody out at the same time. And it just looks like that for some reason. Okay, now let's talk about Mawika's plan to save Natlan, because even though things look okay on the surface, Natlan is still in pretty rough shape. As I've mentioned multiple times throughout this video, Natlan's ley lines were always very fragile, which is why the rules of the pilgrimage and the Ode were set up in the first place. However, that happened thousands of years ago, and 500 years ago, the Conrian Cataclysm took things that were already bad and made them a whole lot worse. That cataclysm destroyed morale, nearly severed all connections with the Wayab, and the Sacred Flame nearly died out entirely. Now, Mawika was actually the Archon of that time period 500 years ago. She was the one who rekindled the light of hope in the people of Natlan and gave the surviving heroes and the next Pyro Archon special instructions. Over the next couple hundred years, they were supposed to rebuild Natlan and reunite the scattered tribes. This would allow the Wayab to regain their strength, and once they were fully recovered, each Wayab would select a hero and grant them a special ancient name that contained the memories and accomplishments of past heroes. These chosen heroes would then leverage the power of memories that were stored within their ancient names and use them to help the Pyro Archon eliminate the Abyss for good, and this process would take about 500 years. Mualani is one such hero, so what we saw with her encountering one of the past name bearers in the Night Kingdom was exactly that. She was inheriting all of the stories of her ancient name. And to ensure this plan actually came to fruition, Mawika chose to die before her time so she could have the chance to wake up 500 years in the future. You know, so she could witness it. Now, this incident is very poorly explained in-game, and even I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but what we do know is that she went into the Sacred Flame 500 years ago and then popped out of it 500 years later, so she could make sure her plan was being properly executed. Problem was, her plan wasn't actually going according to plan. The recovery of the Wayab was not proceeding at the intended pace, and several heroes still had yet to be awakened, and time was running out. Now, technically, Mawika could just tell those unawakened heroes about their potential roles in her plan, but apparently that also comes with the risk of them not properly awakening in time, so this whole situation was pretty stressful all the way around. And at this point in the story, we still have 2 heroes to awaken, and we also need to try and forge an ancient name for the Traveler because they are super Abyss resistant, and that feature would be really, really helpful in the battle against the Abyss. And it would be even better if we had the ability to revive the Traveler if they died with the Ode of Resurrection, but they need an ancient name for that. And there are even more problems with this because no one's ever actually made an ancient name for an Outlander before, and Mawika isn't even sure it's possible. But we've got nothing better to do, so I guess we're gonna go meet up with the best ancient name forger around. Her name is Shilonen. Shilonen is not happy about the prospect of forging an ancient name for an Outlander. Not because she doesn't want to help, but because it is basically impossible. As mentioned earlier, an ancient name is like a book containing all of the recorded memories of the ones who inherit it. But what I didn't mention is that the record only applies in Natlan. In other words, anything someone does outside of Natlan is not recorded by Natlan's ley lines and thus generates no material from which an ancient name can be forged. Similarly, if an Outlander achieves some kind of great accomplishment within Natlan's borders, because they are not Natlanese, their deeds are also not recorded. And even if neither of those things were the case, the Traveler is a descender and isn't recorded by the ley lines anyway. So there's just no material that Xilonen can use to forge an ancient name, which means we need to make some. The going theory is that if we get acknowledged by the Wyab, then the Wyab will record our heroic deeds that can then be recorded in the Night Kingdom. And that should work, except no one's ever really tried to get acknowledgement from the Wyab for something like this before, so we might need the help of a Wyab expert. Enter Citlali, the unaging shaman from the Master of the Night Winds with hundreds of years of experience dealing with the Night Kingdom. She was also the one who made the Spirit Seeker Stone from earlier. Now Citlali clarifies that acknowledgement from a Wyab is not sufficient for the task at hand, and that they'd better just go straight to the Lord of the Night instead. She is the boss of the Night Kingdom after all, but the Lord of the Night is in sleep mode, trying to conserve energy to stabilize the Night Kingdom, so we can only reach her within a trance which requires a ritual and some very unique supplies. So while Xilonen is off collecting the necessary ingredients, Citlali and the Traveler decide to investigate the Fatui because the one who helped the captain escape just so happens to be Citlali's grandson, Oraron, and she's kind of worried he's being coerced by some bad people. And you know what? Fair enough. My grandma would do the same thing. Now, the Traveler and Citlali get separated while looking for Oraron, and Oraron then takes the opportunity to pull the Traveler's consciousness into the Night Kingdom so that they can have a private chat with the captain. Well, it's more like the captain just wanted to issue the Traveler a private invitation to chat about his doubts regarding Mahuika's plan to save Natlan, but semantics. Back in the physical world, we finally managed to find Oraron at a Fatui camp, and he confesses to everything, explaining that he only helped them because he didn't want Citlali to be targeted by them instead. So he gets arrested by the Natlan officials and then later released thanks to Citlali vouching for him, and then he meets up with the Traveler later for a proper meeting with the captain. Feels like a lot of running around for nothing, but okay. I guess we should hear the captain talk about how he thinks Mahuika's plan is just too risky. After all, there is no guarantee that the final 2 heroes she needs will actually appear, nor can she promise that the 6 heroes will be enough to eradicate the Abyss. And if she fails, not just Natlan, but the entire world could suffer the consequences. He also says that she does actually have a backup plan, but the price to execute it is so high that he worries that if she does need to use it, she may hesitate for too long and then there just won't be enough time and everything's doomed anyway. Now, the backup plan of hers involves the Gnosis, which is partly why the captain challenged her to a fight for it earlier. Apparently, the Gnosis has the ability to drain all of the souls from the Night Kingdom and then weave them into a giant net around the ley lines. This net would then function like a protective barrier that would keep the Abyss out of the ley lines and Teyvat. Now, this sounds great on paper, but draining all the souls also means losing all of Natlan's memories, and thus its history, which in itself is a type of death, which is no bueno. Plus, the soul net barrier can still be corroded over time, so at best, this backup plan is just a very, very expensive way to buy more time to find a better solution. But the captain seems to have another plan. But before he can share it, Citlali shows up and he has to make a strategic exit. Oraron runs away too. Citlali turns to alcohol, then tells us about Oraron's past, something I would usually skip over in a recap, but it's relevant for something else, so here we go. Citlali says that Oraron was abandoned near the tribe as a baby because he was born with an incomplete soul. Now, those born with incomplete souls are seen as bad omens because they attract wandering spirits which cause illness and misfortune. This is partly because the souls are supposed to be in the Night Kingdom, so if they're in the physical realm, then they're not where they're supposed to be, and that causes problems. Now, you can send the lost souls back to the Night Kingdom, but the process is a little bit tricky and also very tedious because you can only do it one at a time. Now, the Masters of the Nightwind saw an opportunity to use baby Oraron as a vessel that they could then fill with countless lost wandering souls. Then they would offer him up in a sacrificial death which would return all of the souls within him to the Night Kingdom, which in turn would strengthen the ley lines. This ritual obviously failed because Oraron is here, he survived and grew up, But the whole thing did leave him feeling like he sort of failed his tribe and failed Natlan because he wasn't able to fulfill the purpose that he would have been really good at, which was becoming a vessel for all these lost souls that would then be used to repair and strengthen the ley lines. So see, Lolly thinks that the captain may have promised Auroron some way of fulfilling that purpose all over again. But in truth, Auroron instead appears to have some sort of kindred with the captain. So they may just share a similar perspective. Cause see, the captain is also a vessel for souls. Now, you don't really learn this until Act 5, but the captain was once upon a time a normal Conrian soldier by the name of Thrain. Thrain possessed a kind of mechanical heart that was modified by Conrian technology that allowed him to convert memories and souls from the ley lines into knowledge that he could use. This also granted him the ability to perceive souls, much like Auroron, but after encountering countless lost souls during and after the Cataclysm, he decided to forego his modified heart's ability to leverage knowledge and use it instead as a vessel to carry souls instead. So yeah, Captain Thrain became a vessel for souls, same as Auroron. And this is likely the reason for his hasty retreat from the fight with Mahuika. She had wounded him just above his heart, and he was likely trying to prevent her from damaging his soul receptacle. Now, because he's a container of souls, he's also picked up some nifty soul-related tricks like soul ferrying, a method of sending souls back to the Night Kingdom. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Auroron claims that this skill is unique to the Masters of the Nightwind, which isn't totally true as far as I know, because King Deshret had his own soul fairy, and I'm pretty sure Hu Tao and Venti ferry souls as well. Their methodology may differ a little bit, and so it's possible that the captain just learned this particular method of soul ferrying from the Masters of the Nightwind because he spent a lot of time in Natlan during and after the Conrian Cataclysm, which is also why he's particularly fond of Natlan despite being from Conria. That and Natlan has one really unique property that we'll talk about later that is very, very important to the captain. But there's nothing we can really do about Auroron and the captain for now, because while we were preoccupied, the Abyss got busy attacking several tribes. So it's probably about time we got back to business and relay everything that we learned to Mahuika and see what we can do about forging an ancient name for ourselves. But when we do get back, it turns out that we weren't the only ones who were trying to figure out what the Fatui were up to. Chaska also spent some time tracking them down and learned that they had been trying to recover dragon relics, known as the secret source mechanisms. As luck would have it, these are crucial for the captain's plan to save Natlan. And that plan is to completely reconstruct the ley lines, just like the Lord of the Night did thousands of years ago. Paimon seems to think that this might be like the Abyss Order's plan to weave brand new ley lines using the Loom of Fate, and she's kind of right. I mean, both plans have similar characteristics, but the Loom of Fate is all about making new ley lines, whereas the captain wishes to seize control of existing ley lines by usurping the throne of the Lord of the Night. So they're a little different, but there is some overlap. Now, the Gnosis would have helped him with this endeavor, but he did fail to retrieve it. So, backup plan. He tracked down 3 scholars who found an alternate method, and that involves using this secret source mechanism. Now, fun fact, the names of these scholars are a callback to our ABC named buddies that we met in Simulanka. I just thought that was kind of neat. Also, if you want a deeper explanation about the relationship between what the captain is trying to do and the Abyss Order's Loom of Fate operation, I've made a whole video about it already, so I'll leave a link in the description for you. But okay, the captain's not completely trustworthy yet. I mean, he is still a Fatui harbinger, so we've got to report everything we've learned to Mahuika. And Mahuika does not agree with the captain. She says that reconstructing the ley lines has a similar cost to using the Gnosis in order to make that whole soul net that protects the ley lines. All of the souls and memories within the Night Kingdom would be sacrificed in both cases. We have to put a stop to the captain's plan so that this doesn't happen, even if we have to destroy the secret source mechanism in the process. And we do manage to chase him down, but we're a little too late. The captain has activated the mechanism, thinking that it will start the reconstruction process, but all he gets instead is a scream. The scream rattles all the souls within the general vicinity, and Auroron, with his fragmented soul, takes some serious damage and almost gets possessed by the ghost of Guthrid, the captain's former second in command. It takes a lot of effort and some assistance from the captain, but Auroron manages to compose himself, and in doing so, connects with his ancient name and becomes the 5th hero needed for Mahuika's plan. That's 5 heroes down and only 1 more to go. Then the Lord of the Night reveals that activating the device is what woke her up, and that's why she screamed. The captain is a bit confused. Why did activating the mechanism awaken the Lord of the Night instead of beginning the reconstruction of the ley lines like he expected? The Lord of the Night then explains that this secret source mechanism was actually a device made by the original dragons that ruled over Teyvat. During their cataclysmic battle with the first Descender, the one who's heading up Celestia right now, the ley lines were very badly damaged, so the dragons tried to use this device to reinforce them. But it was too imprecise on its own, so the Lord of the Night sacrificed herself to become the device's pilot, and she used this device to reconstruct the ley lines. And she can do it again, if Mahuika wishes it. But Mahuika doesn't want that to happen because resetting the ley lines comes at the cost of Natlan's memories and history, which is no different than dying, or just using the Gnosis. But the captain argues that with the time purchased with those memories that they've sacrificed, a new civilization would be able to flourish, and he believes in the power of humanity itself and that the future generation will be able to find a new way to conquer the abyss. So he thinks the risk is worth the potential reward. While Mahuika and the captain have completely opposite ideas of what is best to do for the nation, they are able to reach a compromise. The captain agrees to allow Mahuika to try her plan first, but if she fails, he will be the one to enact the backup plan of reconstructing or resetting the ley lines, and he will take the Lord of the Night's place in that process. Now, we do have the opportunity to have a Q&A session with the Lord of the Night at this point, but let's save this Q&A stuff for when we're done with the recap because it's not really relevant to the plot except for one little bit. You can ask the Lord of the Night about your ancient name. The Lord of the Night basically just says that she's going to reach out to Shilonen in a dream to give her instructions, and it's not really that important, but it's relevant. It tells us how Shilonen gets to know stuff, and also why she shows up with Silali the next day to discuss the particulars of forging an ancient name for an Outlander. The Lord of the Night told her what to do. Now, I feel the need to clarify one more thing. Forging an ancient name consumes some of the forger's life force, so it's understandable that forging an ancient name for an Outlander would consume much more of the forger's life force, and no one is quite sure just how much more it will consume because it's never been done before. That's why when Shilonen says that she's willing to give up her life for Natlan's future, she's just saying that she is fully committed to paying the price. It doesn't really mean that she's gonna die or that she was supposed to die here. I know a lot of people thought that was gonna be the case, but we can't forget that Shilonen is actually one of the 6 heroes, and if she dies, this whole plan is shot. Forging a name for the Traveler wouldn't even be worth it at that point. So yeah, I blame weird localization choices for this confusion. Anyway, the Lord of the Night gives us the Pilgrim's Chronicle, which will then record all of the Traveler's accomplishments in Natlan and allow for the forging of an ancient name. But before we can do anything, shit hits the fan. The Abyss starts leaking out from the Night Kingdom, and warriors from every tribe have to be dispatched to destroy the abyssal pylons that have spawned on the surface. The Traveler assists the best they can, but no matter how strong they may be, they are still just a single person. They can't help everyone. And as night falls, the situation gets much worse. Back at the stadium, the sacred flame begins to dim, and a huge abyssal mass shoots up into the sky. This mass is Gosoithoth, the heart and reaper of the abyss. It summons countless more abyssal pylons, which in turn summon monsters and abyssal mimics, overwhelming Natlan's defenses even with the Fatui's assistance. Mahuika immediately uses the power of the Gnosis to reignite the sacred flame, pushing back some of the abyss's forces, but things are still not looking good. Gosoithoth manages to summon these root-like tumors that are completely invulnerable to attacks even from vision wielders, and they can summon abyssal pylons which summon even more monsters, and anyway, it's just an absolute mess. And amidst the chaos, we find Chaska and Koichi fighting off some monsters, and Koichi doesn't make it. Not even the Traveler's abyssal purification powers can help her. Koichi's death hits Chaska so hard that she awakens as the 6th and final hero. And that means it's finally time to put Mahuika's plan into action. The 6 heroes gather at the stadium and summon the power of their respective ancient names in order to invoke the Ode of Resurrection Mega Mode! Well, what she actually did was declare a nationwide Night Warden War, with thousands of participants. And you remember the rules of the Night Warden War, right? If the Night Warden warriors obtain victory by having even one member of their team survive, the rest can be resurrected by the Ode without cost. And because this is the enhanced version of the Ode of Resurrection, this also applies to people who don't have ancient names. So basically, Malhuika has declared that every single person in Natlan is now one big Night Warden team, so as long as even one person remains alive, she will immediately revive them. Limited time offer, conditions apply, see Celestia for details. Renova will come to collect her debt. But now it's time for a good old counterattack, and Malhuika finally gets the chance to show off the full might of the Pyro Archon and obliterates the Abyssal Tumors with an aerial support. And once the tides of battle shift in their favor, she gathers up all the power she can muster from the Pyro Dragon's divine throne and punches the Abyss in the face. If you can even call that a face. But she does punch so hard that the punch keeps going and eventually crashes into the firmament, causing it to glitch out and reveal the shattered remains of a moon against a dark, unfamiliar sky on the other side. Maybe we don't think about that for right now. Actually, we're not going to think about that for the rest of the quest. We'll just have to revisit it another time. For now, at least, the war is finally over. Well, sort of. We still have some unfinished business to take care of. After all, we haven't even forged the Traveler's ancient name yet. This technically wasn't even the final battle, it was just one to force the Abyss out of Natlan on the surface level and back into the Night Kingdom so that we can purge the Abyss from the Night Kingdom. Oy, oy, oy. We'll have to head back to the Night Kingdom and stomp out the Heart of the Abyss eventually, but we do have some time to rest, recoup, and help out around some of the local tribes with Yansan. The Flower Feather clan was hit particularly hard during this battle, and quite a few people are suffering severe hallucinations as a result of abyssal corruption. Now, these hallucinations prey on people's pre-existing fears and anxiety, so helping them isn't quite as simple as purifying the abyssal energy within their bodies. We also have to calm the fears within their minds. This condition is called abyssal corrosion syndrome, or at least that's what the captain calls it. He also says it varies in severity, with the milder cases resulting in hallucinations that can be treated normally, while more severe cases cause hallucinations that can only be treated with special medicine called the Draught of Lucidity, which was developed by the captain's second-in-command Guthrid. You know, the guy who tried to possess Auroron. The draught not only works on humans, it also works on Saurians, something that we're going to get to witness firsthand in the next act as Kachina's Tepetlosaur companion, Io, is found suffering from abyssal corrosion syndrome as well. After treating one of the warriors, Capitano reveals his past ties to Natlan, how he and his soldiers fought to protect the land from the Abyss, and how the ruler of death, Renova, is the source of all his suffering. Renova can literally define the form death takes, and also deny death to whoever she wants, thereby effectively making them immortal. In fact, she is the one who cursed the Conrians with the curse of immortality, just by denying them death. The captain expresses his desire to break her rules and change his own fate before he leaves. Yansan returns to let us know that Shilonen has finished her preparations for forging the Traveler's ancient name. She just needs a few more stories and anecdotes from the people we've met so far, including Paimon, and once she has that, she's gonna get right to work. Later that night, the Traveler is pulled into the Night Kingdom while dreaming. While there, they discover a light barrier that they can pass through, but the lost souls on the other side can't. This barrier represents the extent of the Lord of the Night's protection. No souls may enter, and no souls may leave. Actually, this barrier likely plays a role in why the people of Natlan can't leave Natlan, and it also might be what the game means when they describe the Night Kingdom as being cut off from the rest of the ley lines. It's not that they're disconnected exactly, it's just that there's a blockade of the Lord of the Night's power blocking the flow of souls and information. Now, this Night Kingdom visitation is in a dream, so while we do see the captain and the ghost of Guthrid here, they do not see the Traveler. Now, one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the captain has to do with the reason why he is so fixated on helping Natlan specifically. Yes, he was a soldier that tried to protect Natlan hundreds of years ago and thus feels a sort of responsibility and affection for it, but that is definitely not his only motivation. Both Malhuika and Auroron agree on this point later that day during a pre-Abyss battle party. They also point out that Guthrid's soul should not have survived for this long outside of the ley lines, so he must have been carried by the captain somehow. And we already know what that somehow is. It's his modified heart that he's been using as a vessel for lost souls. And we're definitely going to come back to the captain, but for now, the Traveler needs to go pick up their ancient name from Shilonen. And that name is Tumaini, which means hope. Lali describes the name as a light that guides us through the darkness, similar to the stars or the moon. There's just one last thing we have to do for this whole ancient name thing. We need to test the name to make sure it actually works. Because remember, the point of us having this ancient name is that so we can be revived in battle if we fall against the abyss. And if it doesn't work, then it's kinda useless. Lali is still concerned that it might be useless anyway because the Ode of Resurrection only works if your whole team wins. And right now, the plan to go down to the Night Kingdom and to fight the Heart of the Abyss only involves a team consisting of the Traveler and Mahuika is fated to die. So, yeah. Anyway, the test succeeds in confirming a strong connection to the Night Kingdom, but the ritual also attracts a lot of lost souls. This is apparently a side effect of the Night Kingdom growing weaker over time. The souls that are supposed to return to the Night Kingdom are unable to make the trip and need to be sent there one at a time. And as we saw with Guthrid, souls tend to erode over time, and those that are too deteriorated can't make the trip and then wither away into nothingness, unable to ever be reborn. And as it stands, the Night Kingdom is in such terrible shape, it's struggling to receive any new souls, including Saurian souls. So we're fighting for the future of the living and the dead. Just, no pressure. But okay, the ancient name is in hand and functional, so it's time to head to the Abyss and meet a lot of familiar faces, some living, some dead, and some, like Guthrid, are kind of neither living or dead. Look, I know I called Guthrid a soul and a ghost earlier, but technically speaking, he's like a spiritual reconstruction of how Natlan remembers Guthrid. But he's not actually the original Guthrid. Guthrid was remembered as a virtuous hero, and so this fictional reconstruction has those traits. But the real Guthrid was actually measured and kind of cruel, and it's never actually been confirmed, but it seems like all these so-called souls that the captain carries may actually be fictional recreations of his comrades, which would then make sense seeing as the device he was carrying the men was supposed to hold knowledge. Memory and knowledge are pretty similar after all. But I don't really know if that doesn't make them souls. But I think the philosophical discussion about what makes a soul into that should probably be saved for another time. I just wanted to clear that up in a way that probably didn't clear anything up at all. So, with the help of the souls of the people who we've met in life and death during our time in Natlan, we finally reached the location where Gosoi Thoth has been hiding. And this thing is not playing around. It uses the voices of the previous Pyro Archons that it stole from the ley lines to spew words of hopelessness and fear, assuming, perhaps correctly, that these lines may take a toll on Mahuika and the Traveler's psyche. Mahuika manages to land one good hit on Gosoi Thoth before it decides that psychological warfare isn't cutting it, so it changes its shape to that of the former Pyro Sovereign, Shuicoatl. I mean, let's face it, what's more powerful in Teyvat than one of the ancient Dragon Sovereigns? It's a pretty scary choice. And so the two are faced with a pretty hopeless battle. But in the face of hopelessness, hope shines eternal and the Traveler finally fully connects to Natlan's ley lines and resonates with the power of Pyro, just in time to give Gosoi Thoth a good ol' smackdown, and to also get smacked down real hard in return. Gosoi Thoth strikes at the sacred flame, and just when it seems like the flames have stopped burning, the people of Natlan join together and sing the Ode of Resurrection, which revitalizes the sacred flame and allows the Traveler and Mahuika to pull from the flames a sword that can cleanse the darkness. And the sword does just what it says on the tin. With one decisive strike, Gosoi Thoth is obliterated by the sword of the sacred flame. Finally, the war is won for good this time, and it is time to celebrate with a big old party and everything. And while the Traveler is distracted, Mahuika quietly slips away to die. Like a Hilichurl at the end of their life. Now, I know it seems that, winning the war against the Abyss would change Mahuika's fate and she wouldn't have to die because, the Abyss is gone, but, turns out that's not actually the case. In the fight against the Abyss, Mahuika used the Ruler of Death's power, and that put Mahuika in Renova's debt. And the only way to repay that debt is with her own death. And she plans to pay that debt in Natlan, the ancient dragon city and the place where the first Pyro Archon Xbalanque lit the sacred flame. And then finally, after literally years of waiting, we get to see one of the Primordial One's 4 shades, Renova, the Shade of Death, a giant eldritch horror in the sky. Well, I guess technically that's not really Renova, it's just an extension of her power and her means of looking over to that. If it looks familiar to you, it's probably because it's pretty similar to the rift in space that the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles made at the start of the game, and she's also likely a shade. or the primordial one herself. It's kinda hard to say at this point, but that's a discussion for another time. Renova sounds like an overworked office lady, bored stiff but still faithfully carrying out her duties. And it is her duty to witness Mawika's death. Mawika does in fact intend to die, but doesn't intend to let her death be in vain. She plans to offer herself up to the sacred flame once again and use those flames to sustain the Lord of the Night so she can continue to protect Natlan. But the amount of power Mawika's life can provide isn't limitless. It will eventually run out in a few hundred years. It can, of course, be sustained by continuing the pilgrimage, which generates the contending fire the sacred flame feeds on, but Mawika is stubborn and wants the pilgrimage to change. That means no more contending fire. And she's determined to see this through, but the Lord of the Night has other ideas. She believes that the captain makes for a much better sacrifice. And for reasons I admit I don't quite understand, Renova seems obligated to accept Yohal Tekutin's choice of sacrifice. So if Yohal wants the captain, Yohal will get the captain. And the captain has every reason to cooperate because he wishes for all the souls within his modified heart to be able to enter Natlan's ley lines, and Yohal Tekutin has the power to change the rules and make that happen. But there is one teeny tiny problem with this change in sacrifice. Unlike Mawika, the captain is immortal and therefore cannot die and offer his life up to the sacred flame. And if he tries, he'll trigger a paradox wherein two of Renova's rules will be in conflict with each other. That paradox will then disrupt the order underpinning the entire world, which would be a disaster even Renova couldn't fix. Which means, if Renova plans to respect Yohal Tekutin's choice of sacrifice, she will have to forego one of her rules. Either she clears the debt of death, or she revokes the curse of immortality. She decides the curse of immortality must stand and breaks the payment of death rule instead. But while the death debt is cleared, Yohal Tekutin still needs fuel so she can properly power the ley lines. So the captain consensually fuses his existence with hers. His immortal body will provide her with infinite life force, and in return, she rewrites the rules of the Night Kingdom to allow the souls of Outlanders to enter, including those kept within the captain's heart. It also seems as though the captain's own soul is able to seek refuge in the Night Kingdom, although I doubt that means he can be reborn, seeing as he's kind of chemically wedded to an angel now. That's a reference some of you will understand, and if you don't, that's okay. But whatever the technicalities are here, it does seem that he can at least leave his flesh behind and free himself from the endless suffering of living within a rotting body. So that's nice. Now, I do think it's a bit odd that Renova never once acknowledges the presence of the Traveler or Paimon during this whole exchange. Like, I know she's just here to witness the end of her contract with Xbalanque, but you'd think she'd at least say something to or about a Descender being there, given that, they're right there, and Descenders are super important to Vat. I mean, the leader of Celestia, who she reports to, is a Descender. Which does beg the question, is it possible that Renova can't see them? I guess we'll just have to wait until our next encounter to find out. And now that the crisis within the ley lines has finally been resolved, Natlan can move forward. The pilgrimage will no longer come with the risk of death. The Natlanese can finally travel to Vat freely, and the ley lines can reconnect with the rest of the world's network. And to commemorate this achievement, a memorial is erected to honor the captain and all of those who fought for Natlan's freedom against the Abyss. So now that that's over with, let's go over all the Q&A sessions that we had with the Lord of the Night and Mawika, because there's some interesting stuff in here that wasn't really relevant to Natlan's plot, but still matters overall. I'm actually only going to go over the stuff I haven't touched on already, so there's only 3 things here, but still worth talking about. I want to start by talking a little bit about the Loom of Fate, because Yohal Tekutin tells us that she has never even heard of the Loom of Fate. She even says that she can't create something from nothing and thus lacks the ability to create new ley lines, which is quite interesting because that is what the Loom of Fate is supposed to do. And that means that the Loom of Fate's abilities surpass that of the Seelies, and the Seelies are angels of Celestia, right? They're the servants of God, basically. Which is interesting to me because during another Q&A, Mawika says that the ley lines were initially created by the heavenly principles, and if the angels serve the heavenly principles directly, you would assume that there would be some sort of shared knowledge or skill set there. But I would like to caveat Mawika's statement by saying that that the heavenly principles in this case may or may not actually refer to the first descender. See, heavenly principles is just a title that's given to the one who currently rules heaven. It's like calling somebody a king. Who the king is may change with time, but the title of king doesn't. So if you say that the king does something but never specify what the name of that king was, you could be attributing that accomplishment to any king. I don't think we need to think too deeply on this for right now, but I would like you to keep it in mind for future patches because I have an inkling that there's more to this than we think there is, but I literally have nothing to base this on but vibes. But these vibes aren't really based on nothing. They're actually based on phlogiston, because phlogiston seems to have a lot of properties in common with the primordial sea, and one of the dragon sovereigns governs the primordial sea and was the original heart of the primordial sea before the arrival of the first descender. And Shwequaddle seems to have been the same thing for phlogiston. And the first descender is the one who made the system of elemental energy that was based off of phlogiston. And I'm just wondering if the first descender modified ley lines in the same way that they modified phlogiston, if that makes sense. That's where the vibe is coming from, but I literally have nothing else to go on besides that. But I have made a couple videos kind of expanding on this idea if you are interested in learning more about it. It really might be worth your time because during another later Q&A session with Mahwika, we learned something that's quite interesting within the context of this whole ley line, elemental energy, celestial shade type of thing. When we ask Mahwika about the place we're going to next, which is Snezhnaya, Mahwika decides to tell us about a place called Nod Krai, which is kind of like this borderland on the edge of Snezhnaya. She's assuming that that's where we're going first. And she also says that in Nod Krai, there are people there who possess a strange power that predates the elements. And any power that's predating the elements should have existed alongside phlogiston, right? Because elements were created as a modification of phlogiston. But phlogiston is also connected to the secret source mechanisms, and the secret source technology that the mechanisms come from belong to the dragons. And they also apparently come from the moon. And the frost moon is worshipped in Nord Krai, at least by a small group of people. And during a combat event, we learned that this weird power that some of these Frost Moon worshippers have seems to resemble magic, like just straight up magic. Not even vision elemental manipulation, but magic. I almost wonder if it's a Hexenzirkel style thing. So whether my vibes are on point or off point, I do think we're going to be getting more information about this topic once we get to Nod Krai, or even leading up to it. And speaking of Nod Krai, it seems like that is the current stronghold of the Doctor. A curious mention here because when we ask Mahwika about the Gnosis, she tells us that there will likely be another Harbinger that's sent to collect it. I do wonder if this Harbinger will be the Doctor or a Harbinger that we haven't met in person yet. I'm kind of hoping it's the latter, really, because, you know, we've got a lot of Harbingers we haven't met yet. Shockingly, I think that actually does it for all of the Q&A bits that we haven't covered elsewhere in this recap. But I do want to close with a very quick and simple theory, if I may. Since the captain is kind of dead, we are unlikely to confirm which constellation on the Fatui wheel belongs to him, but I do think that constellation may be this one, the 3 crossed nails. It would be really appropriate because 3 crossed nails are considered a symbol of sacrifice because 3 nails were used to nail Jesus to a cross. And the captain sacrificed himself for Natlan. Plus, there's this very deliberate shot that shows up during some of the ending stories where we're talking about the heroes that saved Natlan, and that obviously includes the captain. And it's just got these 3 crossed swords, and one of them is the captain's. I think it's pretty hard to argue against this imagery. I don't even know if this really counts as a theory at this point. But I still wanted to bring it up because this is likely the only kind of confirmation or hinting at his constellation that we'll get. And with that, my friends, our journey in Natlan is finally complete. Well, sort of. The main one is. Obviously, we still have some unresolved issues of the new Harbinger coming to collect the Gnosis, so there's likely an epilogue scheduled for a later date. And we obviously still have to go see Eon-san at the Collective of Plenty and all that kind of stuff, but, you know. Regardless of what the future holds, thank you so much for making it this far and for watching this video. I really appreciate it, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this trip into Natlan, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.